Okay, perfect. Let's get started. So can everybody hear me okay? Can I get like a reaction in the platform? Amazing. Thank you. Oh, yep. I see a raised hand. Ava, would you? Okay, the hand is down. Feel free to raise your hand throughout. Also, please feel free to put questions in the chat as I'm going through everything. Depending on how many questions are coming in, if it feels like it might be disruptive, then we might wait for questions at the end. I did leave about 15 minutes during the schedule tonight that we will be able to have time for lots of questions at the end. But if things are coming, into your mind as we're going through, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. So I think we'll get started. My name is Casey Lane. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I'm really excited to do a full case interview overview, kind of say, from start to finish, what does a case interview look like? What are the components? And even give some good, tips and direction for how to approach one if you are doing a real interview. So, a little bit about me to get started. As I said, my name is Casey. I live in Chicago. I did undergrad at Washington University in St. Louis, and then I recently finished my MBA at Kellogg. And I will be heading to BCG Chicago post graduation. So I have very recently gone through the interview process just a couple of years ago. And for those of you who aren't familiar with how MBA programs work, you have usually about 2 years, and your first year, you're recruiting for a consulting role. So I recruited for consulting throughout my first year. And then I was a trainer and teacher for consulting throughout my second year. So that brings me to this next slide, which is that I'm excited for you to join me and just want to share a little bit about my credentials. So why do I do this? Why do I have the skill set to do this? And there's kind of two reasons for that. One is that I spent a lot of time for my own personal reasons learning how to case. And then I also have spent a lot of time teaching others how to case. So personally, as I said, I was in an MBA program. During my first year, I was recruiting. I recruited for 6 different firms during that time, and actually was fortunate enough to get interviews at all 6 of them. I only ended up doing 3 of the interviews because by then I'd gotten 2 offers from BCG and McKinsey, which I knew I would take if I had to pick between all of them, and so I did cancel the other interviews. But I learned how to do this for myself in a relatively successful manner, and I actually really enjoy the casing process. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But I decided then in my second year to spend a lot of time as a case coach for incoming Kellogg first years. So, in addition to coaching on Leland, which has been a great experience, I also served as Kellogg's large group trainer. You'll see a photo of me with some of my peers there. We would teach about 200 students every week, different components of the case interview. So I've spent a lot of time in large group settings as well as smaller interview prep group settings where I was coaching maybe 5 or 6 people, as well as, those peer-to-peer casing peer settings. So I've given over, about 50 cases in my time. I absolutely love doing it. I think it's a fun, challenge to work through together. And that's what brings me here. So I'm really excited to walk everyone here through what a case interview is. And I think we'll just dive in and get started. So we have 3 agenda items for today. First, why do firms even use case interviews? Second, the case interview overview at a high level. And then finally, a section by section breakdown of what a case looks like and all of the components. So we'll start with, why do firms even use case interviews? They're kind of a weird type of interview. They unfortunately take a lot of time to prepare for. So, what is the benefit from the firm side for using the interviews? Firms use case interviews for 4 main reasons. They want to be able to evaluate how you solve problems, your basic quantitative and qualitative skills, if you can apply a structured approach to an unknown problem, and whether you are resilient and coachable. So, a couple of these words might pop out. Quantitative, they do include some sort of math component. The last thing, though, I do really want to highlight, which is part of a case interview, is determining whether you are resilient and coachable. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because I think a lot of people think that they have to show up for a case interview and be literally perfect from start to finish. You can't go in the wrong direction in any moment. But I like to bust that myth because part of them evaluating if you're coachable or if you're resilient is they have to watch you struggle or go down the wrong direction a little bit in order to see if you're able to course correct or if you're able to take their nudging. So I just want to, calm everybody a little bit that when it comes to a case interview, obviously the bar is high, you need to perform well, but you don't need to be literally perfect the entire time. And I think that's an important reminder as we come into these very complex scenarios. So this is what firms are looking at when they are giving a case interview. Now, just on a very high level, what a case interview might look like as part of the interview overall. So, different firms have different interview structures. Some firms do 5 minutes of kind of intro. Maybe they ask you 2 or 3 fit questions. So, behavioral interviews, maybe a tell me about a time that you led a team type thing. Then they'll jump into the case and then they'll take time to wrap up, maybe let you ask some questions. And that's what the entire interview will look like. Other firms, the case is pretty much the whole thing. You sit down, they say, great, welcome in today. We're going to jump right into the case. You barely even share names. Other firms spend an equal amount of time and waiting for their behavioral interview as they do for the case interview. And so those you're going to see more of like a 20-minute breakdown. The firms, it depends on which firm. At a high level, BCG is more similar to the first one where you do the small amount of fit, then case interview, then wrap up. Bain likes to have one interview that you're doing that's only fit, and then 2 components that are cases. And McKinsey likes this equally weighted fit interview, which they call the PEI, and then case interview. And once you know which firms you're going to be interviewing with, you can understand which structure you should be preparing for. But the good news here is that the case part, the preparation is almost identical no matter which firm you will be interviewing with. There's some small differences. Most of MBB's interviews are still virtual, whereas I know Deloitte has started to have in-person interviews again. So there are those nuances. And if you work with a coach or someone helping you prepare, you can tailor that preparation to the nuance of the firm that you will be interviewing with. So before we get started, I wanted to see if people were open to sharing their level of familiarity with case interviews at this point. So these are the reaction buttons. Would love to hear, are people pretty new to cases or maybe have done a couple? Okay, we've done some people, it's relatively new, but they've watched some examples online or things like that. Some people have even tried cases. Some people have done a few and know maybe which areas they need to work on. So I'm glad that we have a little bit of variety here. And I think that the information I prepared today is broad enough that it will be helpful if you've really only started to dip your toe in the water of case interviews, but it's also detailed enough that even if you've done a case or two, you can still pull something out of it. And I don't know what that last kind of scared face reaction was, but hopefully it was an excited face that you're excited to learn about this whole new area of interviewing. And I want to level set too by sharing that when I started at Kellogg, great, love it. When I started at Kellogg, I did not know what a case interview was or what I was getting into. My first day of Kellogg, actually, we had one of the deans give a speech and he made a comment about MBB. And I turned to the person next to me and I said, what is MBB? So if you are very new, you're just now learning what casing is, that does not mean that you cannot absolutely crush a case in a short amount of time when you are interviewing. So now let's dive into the meat of the night, which is a section by section breakdown of a case. And this will give a helpful overview, but also some ideas of how to approach cases and different components of it, as well as a few pro tips throughout. So we will dive in. Of the case, there's a couple different sections. Every case will start with a case start. Then there'll be some some work in the middle where you're doing some analysis, quantitative, qualitative analysis. And then most firms, McKinsey's a little bit different, but most firms have you end with a synthesis and a recommendation. So we're going to start by looking at the case start. The purpose of the case start is to show that you can understand the high-level problem at hand. What does a case start look like? A case start looks like a prompt. So the interviewer is going to read you a prompt that tells you the challenge that your client is facing today, so you understand what you all are here to do together. So a prompt might sound like this. Our client, Pizza Hut, a fast food pizza chain with 3 stores in Wichita, Kansas, they have been financially successful for the past few years, but have run out of suitable locations in Wichita that will generate enough traffic for future stores. So they're considering expanding into the neighboring city of Topeka and have approached us to help them determine if they should expand into Topeka. So there's your prompt. The interviewer just said that to you. You're frantically writing down notes. You're focusing in on should they expand into Topeka as the main question you're being asked today. And now you know that you're about to spend the next 20 to 30 minutes helping the client make that decision. So how do you approach a case start? First, while the interviewer, that's a great question. I believe Jaden just asked that question. Jaden asked, do you usually get to see the prompt or is it mostly just read to you? I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, it's just read to you. So you will have your paper and your pen or pencil, and you will be jotting down notes. You really want to jot down key facts, key numbers, and the client name, all of those things as they're reading it to you. Great question. Please keep the questions coming. So while the prompt is being read, your 2 roles are to listen to the prompt and to take notes to record key facts. And again, those are things like the client name, any numbers that they share with you, and then specifically the goal of the client today. So for us, that was, I'll go back a slide, should the client expand into Topeka? So that is step 1. Step 2 is when you actually start interacting with your interviewer. The first thing that we recommend you do at Kellogg is to react. Maybe say something to just break the tension, break the ice. Could be as simple as, I love pizza. I had pizza last night, so I'm really excited to work with our client Pizza Hut today. It's a little bit cheesy, but it helps get you on the right foot and get moving into the case. Then you need to synthesize, which is telling back the components of the prompt that they just shared with you. So just to make sure we're on the same page, our client is Pizza Hut. They've been doing great in Wichita with their 3 stores and are looking to expand into Topeka, and they came to us to determine if that's the right decision. And your interviewer will say, yep, that sounds great. Or maybe if you misheard a number or you misheard what the objective was, they might correct you. So this is a perfect time to make sure you and the interviewer are on the same page. Next, you're going to ask 2 to 3 clarifying questions. At Kellogg, we like to use the phrase BOMGT, BOMGT, to see what types of questions you should ask. And the way you can use this little vernacular is, do I understand their business model? Do I understand the client's objective? Do I understand any metric that we're trying to hit? Do I know where the client is located? And is there a specific timeline for addressing this challenge? So any of those things that were told to you in the prompt, you don't need to ask. But if you're sitting there and you're like, what question should I ask? These are great places to start. Do we have an objective? Do we have a timeline? What geography are we working in? Those types of things. So we've reacted, we've synthesized, we've asked a couple clarifying questions of our interviewer, and now in our head, we might categorize the problem. Okay, this seems like a growth case or a market entry case. And that will help us with the next step, which is the big step of case starts, building your framework. So we're going to dive into what a framework is. Quickly, 1 pro tip. I love it. This is a market entry case. Exactly. We're determining if we want to enter the Topeka market. A quick pro tip, when you're asking the questions, before you've asked all your questions, the biggest thing to stop and remember to yourself is, do I understand how this client makes money? And if there's any confusion in your brain how the client makes money, that should be one of your questions. And it can be as simple as, oh, okay, this sounds like a fast casual pizza place where we sell pizza to customers and they pay us for the pizzas and maybe other salads or sides or things like that. Does that sound right? And they'll confirm. but it could be a more difficult case, like an insurance case or a non traditional case. And so it's really important that you understand how your client is making money. Okay, time to get into the framework. So, after you've figured out what the challenge is, you've asked your questions, now you have a couple of minutes with a pen and paper to write out a framework, almost like a map of how you want to go about solving this challenge. In early days of casing, when you're first learning how to do it, the framework is going to be pretty standard. It's going to be a structured breakdown of this is the challenge, and I'm breaking it down into these buckets that we'll look at in order to solve the challenge. As you get better and better at casing, your frameworks will become more nuanced. And by the end, they'll become this tool that's in your casing toolkit where you can look at your framework and know that the answer to the client's challenge is somewhere in that framework. And now you just need to figure out what the answer is. So, what does that actually look like? This is what a framework looks like. It's the big question we're asking, and then it's sub buckets of usually three, sometimes two, but usually three areas to analyze in order to answer that question. And as I just said, the solution to your client's challenge should be hidden within these buckets, maybe in one spot, maybe a couple spots. And now we'll spend the case figuring out which of those buckets has the solution. So, there's one thing I need to underline before we dive into what a framework might look like, which is the concept of MECE. Has anyone heard of MECE before? Okay, couple people have heard of it. Great. I'll go over it quickly just in case. But MECE is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, which means two things. Mutually exclusive means that the categories do not overlap. So those three sub buckets that you're writing, you should not have them overlapping in any way. They should be distinct things that you want to look at. An example of this could be external versus internal. It's one of two things. Those are not overlapping in any way. A bad example would be pricing versus financials. Those, there's a lot of overlap over them. On the second side, we have collectively exhaustive, which means that we cover all relevant topics. This could look like people enrolled in school versus people not enrolled in school. It could be people under 18, people 18 to 60, people over 60. It's just something that covers every possible group or person or whatever it may be. A bad example of this would be blue Skittles versus green Skittles. There's way more Skittles out there than just those two, so that's not collectively exhaustive. So, putting together the buckets that we'd looked at before and then the concept of MECE, we will create a framework that looks something like this at a very high level. They have way more sub buckets under them when you actually build them. And that's definitely something that I work with people a lot on trying to learn how to build good frameworks. But the main question, should our client expand into Topeka, is at the top. And then the three things we're going to want to look at: the Topeka market. Is it attractive? Are there people there who want to buy Pizza Hut's pizzas? The expansion financials, our revenues, our costs. What'll it cost to enter the market? What'll the revenues that we'll be able to earn be once we enter? And then finally, a lot of times the third bucket is something related to risks. Now, again, these frameworks are nuanced. They're going to be tailored to whatever the prompt may be. So it's not going to look exactly like this every time, but this is an example of what a framework might look like. And then you get to drive out of the framework and jump into solving the case. So once you've shared with your interviewer everything you want to think about and when you're approaching this problem, and that literally does look like you walking them through your framework of everything you want to think about. So you might say, great, my hypothesis is our client should expand into Topeka. It seems like a great opportunity. But in order to determine if that's the right move, I want to look at the Topeka market. I want to look at the financials of expansion, and I want to look at any possible risks we might face. And then you'll keep talking them through all of the sub buckets you have in each of those categories. So it takes about 2 minutes to create it, and then it takes about 2 minutes to tell it to the interviewer. And once you've done all of that, you get to drive out and say, here's where I want to start, and that's where you're going to go. Jackie, I saw your hand raised. Let me know if you want to talk again. Feel free to raise it again. So a lot of times a good place to start might be the market potential. And an example of driving out would be That's a lot to cover. Let's start by looking at the market to see if it's an attractive market. Okay, this was the case start, the first part of the case. We've talked through it. Any questions before I dive into the next part of the case? We'll also have time for Q&A at the end. Okay, this is still a traditional question, market entry, wondering if you have strategies for non-conventional cases. Yes, I do have some strategies. I don't want to spend too much time on it today because we have a lot to get through. That's something I actually was coaching somebody on last week. So I love doing non conventional cases and frameworks. I think a couple key things to think about is maintaining structure and thinking of different ways to be Nisi. So sometimes that might look like a progression, like before, during, or after. Or other ways that you can think about non-conventional cases is actually a lot of times it's kind of similar buckets, even though you might not think it is. So for something with female executives, for example, there's still kind of like a market of potential employees. There's still things related to compensation and financials. There's still things related to risks or regulation. So the two things I would say is no matter what, maintain structure, and second, don't abandon your original buckets too quickly because some of them might still be a useful tool in which to think about the non traditional cases. Great question, Jackie. And then, Jaden, how many buckets minimum should there really be? I mean, minimum two, I would say probably maximum four. Sometimes you'll get a case where the prompt gives you kind of two questions to ask. And in those cases, maybe you have a few more buckets. But if you don't have at least two, then it's not really buckets. It's kind of just like one long line of questions that you're asking. And I think three is a happy spot to be. So that's my answer for that one. Great. Let's dive into the next part of the case. So we've done our framework, we've driven out and said that we want to look at the market, for example. Now we get into the analysis component of the case. And analysis can look like clearing charts, doing case math, or brainstorming. So we're going to start with chart clearing. You will see cases or you will see charts in cases. And the point of interviewers putting charts in front of you is to see how you observe trends and use insights from visuals to drive towards a solution for your client. Charts are huge in consulting. They're all over the place. They're how we communicate to clients all the time. So it's really important that you have a good understanding of how to interpret information from charts. Charts usually are showing you a relationship, a comparison, maybe a trend over time, how something is composed, a composition of something. So, some examples might be how we as a client are doing compared to competitors, a big market opportunity, maybe a cost that we saw that grew really fast, even though our revenues weren't growing very fast, different products that maybe are different levels of profitable. Or sometimes, Bain loves these, a perception chart. So saying, how do your customers perceive you versus how are you actually doing? So you'll see a bunch of different types of charts. And I did not realize there's animations on this slide. How fun. So here's just some examples of some types of charts that you might see. And honestly, there are probably 50 different types of charts out there. It can be a little bit intimidating. And that is super fair. The good news is that no matter what chart you see, there are a few key steps to clear them. And if charts is an area that you're not as strong with, that is something that a couple weeks ago, like I literally spent an hour and a half just doing chart drills with somebody. So maybe not the most fun hour and a half, but by the end, I know that she was feeling really confident with her ability to clear a chart. But no matter what a chart looks like, here's some key steps that you should take. The first, read the title of the chart. Orient yourself to what the chart is called so that you know what you're looking at. Second, read the x-axis and the y-axis. I guess that's these ways. I think chart and the axes is always the first steps. There's no way that it can steer you in the wrong way. Next, note if anything really glaring jumps out. Maybe something is bolded or it's in a different color, or suddenly something spiked up or then it spiked down. Those are the big first level insights that you want to get from the chart. Next, you want to look at a couple more nuanced insights that the chart might reveal. Maybe a certain product isn't performing as well as it used to, or maybe you're seeing one thing that's growth and then something that is decreasing. And finally, drive to what you want to do next with this information and confirm with your interviewer that that is the right step. Jackie said, for chart, do you expect to know specific finance concepts such as EBITDA multiples, etc.? Yes. I would say you should know some basic business jargon, if you will, or terms or concepts. EBITDA, net income, profit. One that you'll see a lot in charts is CAGR, which is compounded annual growth rate. So seeing if something's growing over time. But I will say that if there's something unfamiliar in a chart, do not panic. It is very okay to confirm with your interviewer what that is. So that might look like you saying, I see this acronym CAGR. I'm guessing that has something to do with growth because I noticed that it's looking like it's going up. Can you just confirm what that is? That is totally fine. They want to hear you give a hypothesis though. So they don't want you to just say, oh, what's CAGR? They want you to say, I see this. I think it might be this. Is this correct? So that's the right way throughout a whole case to ask for information if you're not certain. Next, is it okay to ask to take some time to read the chart? Yes, it is definitely okay to ask to take time. During cases, there's a couple times that you can ask to take time. Before your framework, you should take 2 full minutes to write your framework. Some people say 90 seconds to 2 minutes. I think that's a perfect range. Everyone takes time there. Then for the rest of the case, before charts, before brainstorms, and before your conclusion, you are also allowed to ask to take time. You can ask for every single one of those, but I have heard from partners that the more time you take, the higher their expectations are going to be. So I would recommend that you find the 1 to 2 areas that you know time is really going to help you out. And for me, that was charts. I always ask for time before charts, whereas brainstorms, I felt like I could dive right into brainstorms, so I didn't ask for time there. So just to say, it's a little case by case. I mean, if it's an insane chart, take a second. You don't just want to be rambling, not knowing what you're saying. But just if you're asking for time in one area, maybe don't ask for time later on. Okay, I'm going to keep driving us forward with an example. So let's say we see this chart. I will kind of walk through how I would clear this. Awesome. Thank you so much for this chart. I see that we have appliance co-sales. We have actually 2 vertical axes. On the left is sales in millions, and on the right we have our profit margin percent. And then our x-axis is multiple years, so on a 5-year time horizon. I'm noticing year 2 and year 3, we really had the highest sales and the highest profit margins, which is exciting. But then unfortunately, in the 2 subsequent years, those have both decreased. So there might be something going on there where our sales are starting to go down. Very notably, I'm seeing that dryers is actually what was driving a lot of our sales in years 2 and 3 and have since decreased. So there might be something specifically with our dryer sales that has recently changed. I'm wondering if we have any more detail on our dryer sales, maybe competitors, if there was a new competitor in the market that might be stealing market share from us, or anything along those lines that we could look into to understand what's going on. So that was a chart clear. You said the title, the axes, you noted a few important things like the high spike or the low spike. You had a second level insight of, oh, it's not only going up, but I can pinpoint what specifically was going up or down. And then you made a hypothesis of what could be happening and asked for more information to continue driving forward. So that's an example of what a chart clear could be. Again, there's so many different types of charts. The best way to get good at this is just to practice, see more types of charts, take a second if you need to take a second before diving in, but just get used to seeing what types of charts you might see in an interview. And one pro tip related to charts, I already said this, but it is always worth it to spend the first 5 seconds reading the title and reading the 2 axes. And specifically, BCG loves to mess up the axes and have it be multiples of 10 or start at 50 instead of 0 or something like that. So Just do yourself a favor and start there, and then you'll feel so much more oriented to the chart and capable of pushing forward and gathering insights from it. Okay, any more chart questions before we go into math? Cool. Let's keep going. So, case math. What is the point of it? They want to see if you can quantitatively analyze information and tie it back to the larger challenge that we're facing with our client. So, it usually follows a framework or charts. It is required to solve the case, and it does require the ability to solve math in a relatively quick and structured and accurate manner. It matters because you need to show that you have the quantitative skills that are used on the job. You have to prove that you can think analytically about problem solving, and it shows that you can work under pressure and that you're coachable. Math is not testing complex algebra, mental math, or perfect execution 100% of the time, but it is testing your coachability, your organization and ability to stay structured, and your positive attitude. So there are 7 steps for case math: writing down the numbers as you hear them, asking clarifying questions, developing a plan to approach the problem, talking through the approach with your interviewer, doing the math and talking through it as you do the math, relating the result to the overall goal of the case, and then driving out of the math to the next thing that you want to explore. So, an example could be if we've learned that Pizza Hut moving into Topeka, they've done some analysis and figured out that the pizza market in Topeka is 3 billion and they think they can capture 5% of that. And so now they want to know how much that would be in terms of dollars. And so for the steps, you would write down the numbers 3 billion and 5% that you were given, ask clarifying questions, maybe asking, oh, is that, 3 billion is total fast food, or is that the pizza fast casual specifically? You can ask your interviewer that. Then you're going to develop a plan. So in your head, you're going to say, okay, great. So I think I can multiply 3 billion by 5%, and that'll get us our market share. And then you share that plan with your interviewer. You say, great, my plan is to multiply 3 billion by 5% to get our market share. Does that sound good? And they'll say yes. And that step's really important because if you're not on the right track, they'll say no. And it will save you and the interviewer from going down a very long, painful road of unnecessary math that you don't need to do. Similar to not doing unnecessarily painful math, as you are actually doing the work, talk through it with your interviewer so that if you make a mistake, they can correct and redirect you. So you'll say, great, so I know we can capture 5%. I know that 10% of 3 billion would be 300 million. So half of that is 150 million. If I'd said something wrong, like I know 10% of 3 billion is 30 million, so we can get 15 million. First off, I should catch that myself and say, oh, that feels a little low. But if I don't catch it, the interviewer will jump in and redirect me. And so it's important to be talking through that so that they know if you do something wrong, where you went wrong. Next, you're going to relate that results to the goal of the case. So I would say, oh, our market share would be 150 million. And that's really great to hear because I know our client's goal was 100 million. Maybe earlier on in the prompt, they shared what their goal was going to be. And then finally, again, we're going to drive forward, drive out of the math and say, so I know that that we're going to hit our goal in terms of market share and revenue. I do want to understand what the costs to enter a new market might be. Do we have any information on the costs? And that's how you keep driving the case forward. And for almost every firm, you are in the driver's seat. You need to push the case forward. And if you're not doing that, the interviewer is just going to be sitting there waiting for you to say what you want to do next. So my pro tip for math, when you're finished calculating, make sure you tie it back to the main client goal. So in that last example, it was 150 million, which I know is more than our client's goal of 100 million. Here's just some formulas you'll need to know: profitability, return on investment, net present value, break even. I don't have time to dive into those during this session, but jot that down. If you Google what math you should know for cases, these will all pop up. They're pretty standard business calculations. And this kind of ties back to Jackie's earlier question about knowing what EBITDA is or things along those lines. Okay, so we've cleared our charts, we've done our math. Now we're going into brainstorming. I guess I'll quickly pause in case there was any questions about math before I move on. Yes, Jasmine.
Hi, I actually have a concern. You mentioned that sometimes they'll redirect you. Is that ever a good thing to experience? I know that when interviewing for certain finance role, that's not really looked at as a positive thing. Do you think that there's ever a way that you can flip that to make it into a positive, or if it ever happens, that you kind of just remember that you need to clean up your framework while you're there?
Okay, that's a great question. In an ideal world, you don't have to get redirected because you did all your math great. But if that doesn't happen, do not panic, because I said this earlier, but one of the reasons firms are using case interviews is they're trying to test your resilience and your coachability. So if they redirect you and you say, "Oh, thanks so much. That sounds like a perfect way to move forward instead." Or, "Oh, thanks so much. Gosh, I dropped a zero there. I'm glad that we have the right number." And you are positive and immediately implement what they redirected you towards and then continue to proceed without more issues. Again, it's not better than if you didn't have the issue in the first place, but it's almost the same, because part of this job is, being able to hear feedback and implement it immediately and course correct and move on. So do not think like, "Oh, okay, well, I lost that interview just because you had one math mistake." Don't say sorry, even say thank you, and then implement it and move on. I see Robin asked a question: for calculations like present value, will we need to use the calculator during case interview? I do not think any firm lets you use a calculator. So you cannot use a calculator. It all does have to be pen and paper or some mental math. But with things like present value, where the denominator is a discount rate, a lot of times the discount rate they're going to give you is 10%. And so, for those of you who don't know this, if you're discounting something by 10%, you just add a zero onto it. It's like dividing by 10% is like multiplying by 10. So they won't let you use a calculator, but the math should never be more complex than maybe like multiplying two numbers together that you would maybe use a pencil and paper for, but it never gets super, super complex. It's something that you should be able to do with a calculator. Sorry, not with a calculator, with a pencil and paper. So there's a lot of math tricks to learn as you're going through casing. And again, if we had more time, I would deep dive into the math specifically, but I do want to keep moving so that we can get through everything and open it up for more questions. So great questions. Let's talk about brainstorming. Brainstorming usually comes right near the end of the case, and it's after we've done all this great analysis, we have a pretty good idea what the answer might be. We want to brainstorm some maybe risks or other ideas or things like that. And this is a moment when the interview wants to see if you can think on your feet, but also apply structure and a structured approach to ideation or brainstorming in an unknown area. So at some point, you'll be asked to brainstorm ideas. An example: what are some risks Pizza Hut might face by entering the Topeka market? And now there are 4 steps to rock the brainstorm. This could be an area you ask for time, no more than 15 seconds, usually just enough to kind of write out your 2 big buckets, maybe an idea or 2. This is not somewhere I usually ask for time, because this was somewhere I was a little stronger at in casing as compared to other areas. But you almost treat your brainstorm like a mini framework. So you're going to choose 2 to 3, usually 2 buckets. You're going to fill those with some ideas. Some of them are going to be off the top of your head as you're saying it, not written all out because you don't have time. Then you're going to drain it just like a framework by saying each header and then saying what's in each bucket. And then you keep driving forward as always. The whole point of the whole case is that you are driving. So let's see what that might look like. First, we pick 2 main buckets. So maybe these, again, have to be MECE. So you want them to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. An example here might be financial risks and non-financial risks. Then you're going to list out some ideas in each bucket. And again, you might write down the buckets and maybe one idea during the time you asked to think, but then you've just got to get started. So once you've picked them and you've started filling them, you're going to drain it just like you would your framework by saying the two areas I want to look at are financial risks and non-financial risks. Under financial risks, I'm thinking about customer willingness to pay for our product, sourcing costs we might run into, the cost of capital if we're spending big capex. So that's how you go through it. Ava, I'll let you ask your question. Was there a question? Okay, feel free to raise your hand again or throw it in the chat. And then the final step is, like always, drive forward from sharing your brainstorm. One thing I want to know, and I had this on the slide 2 slides ago, don't be afraid of what else. So you might have your 2 great buckets, you said all these great ideas, and then they say, "Oh yeah, those are great. What other ideas do you have?" It doesn't happen very often. I would say less than half the time, but occasionally the partner just wants to keep pushing and see how you work under pressure. And that's where you just start kind of coming off the top of your head, but try to keep those ideas within the main buckets so that you're still maintaining that structure. So that is how we approach a brainstorm. And there's a lot of good structures for brainstorms that I think it's useful to memorize. So here's some examples up here, maybe internal and external, pros and cons, financial, non-financial. You can also do sequencing ones. So this was something I said as a way you can approach non-traditional frameworks. If like way back at the beginning of the case, when we were talking about non-traditional prompts, sequencing can work really well there. It can also work really well with brainstorming. So maybe you're thinking about the value chain of your product. You know, it's going from the producer to the store to the customer to the, I guess the customer is usually the end, but like that's something you can think of for how to structure your brainstorm. You can use business frameworks like the 4 Ps: price, product, place, promotion. So these are ways to structure, but I think it's good to have kind of 3 or 4 favorites, and then really you're going to end up using those in most cases. Okay, we're to the end. Exciting. So we've done the charts, we've done the math, we've even brainstormed. Now we get to just synthesize, tell the CEO what we found, and finish the case. Okay, before we jump into the conclusion, I'm just going to answer Charlie's question about brainstorming really quickly. What if the interviewer keeps pushing and saying what else? Is there a good way to resolve this once you've run out of new ideas? The most horror story I've heard is my friend Marcy, who got 3 what else's. That's the most I've heard. Mostly it's at most 1. I don't think anyone would ask you more than 3. And I know that the way she approached it was by the 3rd time, she said, "Gosh, this is a little out of the blue, but maybe we could blah, blah, blah." I forget exactly what the brainstorm was, but she kind of prefaced it by saying, "Okay, I'm really thinking on my feet here." And I think your ideas can get less good as they keep pushing you further and further, but just keep the structure and maybe even, add a little bit of humor and know that they know they're pushing you. Just stay positive, stay coachable, keep a good attitude. Even if your idea is a little bit crazy, I would still try to come up with something. Vivian, I'm going to answer your question later because I want to get through the rest of the case, and then we can go open Q&A. So again, the CEO walks in. This is how you know that the end of the case is near. So in the conclusion, they're trying to make sure that you can put all the moving pieces together and communicate your recommendation succinctly and clearly. CEOs are busy people. They have maybe a minute. So they want to show that you can do a ton of good analysis, do some great brainstorming, but then share what you've learned in a concise way. So the first step to a conclusion is to answer the main question. So for us, it was, should they go into Topeka? The first sentence you're going to say is, Pizza Hut should expand into the Topeka market. If the CEO cuts you off after this sentence, they still know what you're recommending to do. Next, you're going to show evidence for this. Usually this is quantitative evidence, and usually you want to have 2, maybe 3 numbers. That could sound like, market analysis has revealed that the market for fast pizza in Topeka is over $3 billion, and we can likely capture 5% of that, yielding $150 million in additional revenue over 3 years, which is above our $100 million growth target. That almost might even have been a little bit too wordy. You could even just say, market analysis reveals that we would be able to capture 150 million in additional revenue over 3 years, which is above our 100 million growth target. And I think that would be maybe even stronger than this longer version that I just said. Next, you do want to say some risks that might pop up with this recommendation. Usually you want 2 risks, and then you're going to say 2 next steps to end. Usually those risks get addressed by your next steps. So you might say, there are 2 risks we want to be cognizant of with this recommendation. First is competitive response. If Dalmatian Pizza or Little Carl's decides to expand as well, that might cut into our market share. And the second risk is that there's a new push in the market for eating healthier, and this might reduce customers' interest in our product. To address those risks, I recommend that we develop a strategy for increasing the barriers to entry in the pizza market in Topeka, and our firm can come in and conduct a customer survey to determine the likelihood that healthier habits would reduce Pizza Hut consumption, and we could even explore healthier menu items that we could add to our portfolio. Done. That was altogether 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sentences. It is never more than 7 or 8 sentences. It's short, it's concise. There's a template that I like to use, which is a 1-sentence recommendation, 2 pieces of evidence, and then risk, next step, risk, next step. And I have this written out on my paper, and I fill it in as the case is going along. And people like to take notes different ways. That's something that, I can answer more questions about in a little bit, but it should really just kind of be the structure. And the pro tip I have here is just keep your conclusion structured and concise. The interviewer has probably already decided whether you passed or not. So now's the time to just share the recommendation and don't mess it up. Don't overdo it. Just say it and you're good. The last bonus pro tip I have is remember, for cases in general, you do not have to spike at everything. You don't have to be phenomenal at every single section. You do need to elevate your strengths and make your weaknesses at least passable so that they don't hold you back. But what's going to get you the job is your strengths, not your weaknesses. So make sure that, there's areas that you really feel like you can shine, and then make everything else good enough. So I'm going to stop there and open it up to some questions. I can start with Vivian's, and then if people have any more, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can come off mute. You can even turn on your video camera if you wanted to, but I know me on a Sunday night before a big week, I would probably rather just sit and listen than have to be very interactive. So I totally understand. Vivian, out of curiosity, what are some of the hardest cases you've done when you were interviewing at MBB? I said this earlier, I didn't actually end up taking the interview opportunities with Accenture, EYP, and Deloitte just because I'd already received an offer. So I knew that I was going to choose that. But I did interview for MBB. I think some of the harder ones were probably the more non-traditional ones. There was one about sports, and like a sports scenario. There was one about like biodiversity and maintaining an ecosystem. So I think those were harder just because I had less practice in that area. But again, I really was able to lean on things I'd already learned. Like, we're still thinking about a market, even if it's sports, or we still have to do some analysis, like math about biodiversity and how many species we might lose or gain or things like that. And so leaning on the skills that you build, even from doing traditional cases, you can still succeed in those non-traditional ones. Beyond that, there was one with healthcare, and healthcare and insurance is just always a little sticky, like understanding the revenue models and things like that. So I think that one was a little challenging. So yeah, those are a couple examples of some more challenging ones that I've done. KL said, what made you choose BCG over McKinsey? I absolutely loved both firms. I know this is being recorded, so I don't know if I'm going to be like the most candid person ever, but I think it really just came down to that during the recruiting process, I had built stronger relationships with people at BCG and with a lot of the partners there that I'd met throughout recruiting. And so I had just already been able to see myself there a little bit more than I was able to see myself at McKinsey just based on the people I already had met. Okay, Robin, what tips would you recommend for this long and arduous process in practicing case interviews? That is a great question. I think one tip I have is practice in a variety of ways. So, some days I would do an entire case with a peer and get a whole big practice there. Some days I would do my least favorite drills, which were framework drills because I knew I needed to work on them. But if my brain was tired, but I still wanted to be focusing, I would pivot to math drills or listening to a podcast called the Case Interview Podcast that was all about cases. So I found different ways that I could still be focused on casing in general, but that hit the level of energy and commitment I felt like I was able to give in that moment. Um, Another tip is I think it is helpful to have a little bit of a structured process. And whether you gain that from working with a coach who helps you build that structure. For me, I was very fortunate. I was in business school, and our consulting club really gives you that structure. So I was kind of just able to follow their step by step process that they had set. I think that helped because it took a little bit of the thinking off my plate, and I just had to show up and follow the process as opposed to, totally come up with everything on my own. So that could be a great opportunity for maybe working with a coach, is like helping you come up with a good structure of what to do when. I'm going to let Jasmine speak quickly. Jasmine, I see your hand raised.
Sorry. Okay, I thought I muted myself. Um, my question is kind of simple. So I know what a horrible case looks like, but can you provide some insights of what could possibly deter a person from hiring you or offering you a position? Like, what type of common mistakes do people make that
Mm.
makes them less favorable?
Yeah, I think there's two types of mistakes. One is going to be a mistake that makes it seem like you would be a bad team member. And then the other one would be a mistake that would make you seem like they wouldn't trust that they could put you in front of a client. So the team member stuff is going to be, if you do make a math mistake and you get super upset or you shut down or they tell you to do it one way and you're like, no, I don't think that's the right way to do it, or you're like pushing back or anything along those lines. I think that is it goes back to the attitude and coachability. So it can be a little bit painful in terms of like your actual skills of the case, and if it's really painful, you probably wouldn't get the offer. But what's most important is your attitude throughout the process. So that's one example I would give in terms of the teammate type things, especially if skill wise, you're hitting the base level skills of quantitative analysis, qualitative analysis, all the above. In terms of what they would not feel confident putting you in front of a client, part of that is confidence. If a client is paying a lot of money for these firms to do work for them, and then they put someone in front of the client that they're like, does this person know what they're talking about? That's not going to be giving them a lot of confidence. So I think you being able to speak clearly in a structured manner with confidence is important. You'll notice I'm talking about a lot of soft skills. Again, we're almost saying that the basic quantitative and qualitative analysis skills are kind of table stakes. And then it's really the soft skills that are going to make you stand out. So that would be my answer to that. Hopefully that answers your question.
It did. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, going down to Jackie's. Does vibe, communication, style, tone, dress code all matter? How to increase likability during an interview? I think I kind of just spoke to that in what I was just sharing. So Jackie, if not, feel free to, rechat that I didn't cover that. I would say, dress code's important. I tell people to wear like a nice blouse and blazer, female or male. I think, showing off the blazer is the right thing to do. Um, Other people probably are going to, and so it's better to be the person that also does that than not. Okay. Um, I see Robin's hand is raised. So,
Yeah,
hello.
thank you so much. I just wanted to ask in your experience, or maybe just in general from your understanding, with these like AI tools becoming more prevalent and in use by these consulting firms, do you see them sort of changing what they're looking for in candidates or the way they approach these sorts of interviews or assessments uh,
Hmm.
recently?
It's hard for me to say if they're changing what they're looking for. My intuition is no, because again, the case interview isn't showing you do super complex math or like making you like create slides or things that the AI tools are really good at doing. It's it's the communication and the confidence and the presence that you have. And then it's being able to be quantitatively adept enough that if you say a market is 15 million and in reality it's 15 billion, you can catch yourself so that if you were in front of a client and there was a number that just didn't sound right, or you're gut checking it and something feels wrong, like they know you have those skills enough that you can react in the moment, understand what numbers might be right, what might be wrong, especially with AI that, sometimes hallucinates, sometimes it gives you an answer that's not correct. I think now they're going to be especially focusing on communications, presence, structure, all those like client ready type skills. But they do need to know that you have that basic quant ability, even if AI can do it, because you might be in a meeting with executives, no computers out, it's just pen and paper, you're throwing around numbers, and they need to know that the number you throw around, you know what it means. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, I'll go. I think these last three, I don't actually, my clock has disappeared, but I feel like we're about to hit time. So I'll do these last three and then we will call it a day. Um, Kale, thank you for asking what made me choose consulting. That is a great question. I think what makes a lot of people choose consulting is the level of like every day is different and the curiosity component, like you're getting to learn something brand new every single day. I also felt like I would really grow in my skill sets through this role in a way that I have grown a bit through business school for sure. Like I've definitely grown a lot through Kellogg, but even more so, consulting felt like it would be business school on steroids. Like you're going to be learning something new all the time, like really pushing yourself, really having to show up and present. So I was looking forward to challenging myself in that way. And then the last reason is being able to kind of have an exponential impact. So when I was at my previous role before business school as an individual contributor, I could impact my team and I could impact that company. But when you're in consulting, every few months you're impacting a new company in a big way. And I really liked the idea of getting to build that impact, and exponentiate it. Great. Okay, last three questions. Vivian, how long did you spend case prepping? I did it through business school, as I've said. So I started in August and my interviews were in January. So I spent a few months. Um, I also have a peer that I worked with recently who did it in about a month and a half. So, if you have a shorter amount of time, you're going to have to spend more time per day. You might have to be more structured with the resources that you use, or, the exact plan you follow to make sure you're doing the highest impact things at that time. Whereas, like I said, I could listen to a podcast or just do some math drills instead of the most crucial things if my brain was a little tired. So I spent a lot longer, honestly, probably hundreds of hours, as crazy as that sounds, but it's because I had that amount of time. I've seen people successfully do it in a shorter amount of time as well. Jackie, when answering, should the candidate smile or should they be more serious? I think smile. I mean, again, it goes down to, does this person want to work with you on a team? Yes, being serious can convey confidence. And I do think it's important to read your interviewer and kind of give back the energy that they're giving you. So if it's a super serious person, don't be cracking jokes the whole time because they probably won't reciprocate with that well. But in general, I think match their energy. And I always told myself I wanted to be, if I was going to be remembered for anything, it would be that I had a positive attitude and that I was enjoyable to work with. So that was how I approached it. Um, Okay, and then I love Jackie's last comment with, consulting or implementing AI, but it's still a human business, and that's true. It is human to human, so I'm completely with you there. It's really relationship driven, and even with these great tools, you need someone who can implement it, create change across an organization, and all those types of things. So great. I hope that was helpful. Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed doing this on a Sunday night. Hopefully, it was useful. And maybe I will get an opportunity to work with some of you even more. If not, good luck with your case interviews and this whole process. Have a great Sunday.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.